Hey guys, sorry for missing lecture today. I hated that, and I will make up the lecture. So I thought I'd give just a short additional lecture to be a mea culpa on mandibular anatomy. A couple of things that I think are important and not often sort of noted in the literature and more often discussed actually in the clinical stuff. So um, let me get rid of this. We'll start over. So we'll do a new lecture. Put in put in this Panorex to serve as sort of the basis of our anatomy. Oops, that's weird. Okay, so let's get started. So the teeth are, you guys know the basics of naming the teeth. Assuming we all have third molars, we have 32 teeth as adults. The right upper first and left upper the 16th, so that they are labeled. Let me get some of my stuff here. So now I got a writer. So first goes across right to left to the 16th, and then down to the 17th, across to the 32nd. I kind of prefer actually naming the teeth, including the incisors. There's the medial and lateral incisors. Then the canine teeth, first and second premolars, and then first, second, and third molars. I'll just briefly mention here, although it's something for later discussion. Notice that the medial maxillary incisors are twice the width of the mandibular incisors. All the other teeth are fairly similar in terms of their size, and this is not discussed anywhere in radiology. I don't know why. But anyways, what this creates is that the upper row of teeth are 1/2 width posterolaterally displaced in relation to the upper. So the lateral upper incisor half overlaps the lower incisor as well as the lower canine. That's an important concept. So this idea that the upper medial incisors are 2 times the width of the lower is important in understanding occlusion of teeth, which is an important concept that is wide-ranging. Sorry to get off on a tangent, but that's important. Okay, so more specifically regarding mandibular anatomy, so we have medial incisors, lateral incisors, and canine. If we draw a line down the canine teeth, that creates the separation between the symphysis and parasymphyseal region, and the next portion of the mandible. So the canine tooth provides the divider. If we go down to the third molar, the junction between the second and third molar, if we draw a line down to the mandible, that is the body. So the body of the mandible is between the canine tooth and just anterior to the third molar. If we draw a line now posterior to the third molar, in this case partially impacted at some angle, and I'll describe this, then we've created the angle. So angle of the mandible. Well, where is this angle described? Well, it's actually defined by the insertion of muscles on the outside aspect of the mandible. That is where the masseter inserts, and on the inside of the mandible where the medial pterygoid inserts. So the pterygomasseter sling inserts on the angle of the mandible. The posterior aspect of the mandible and medial pterygoid form the junction of the posterior aspect of the angle. So now we're left with this portion of the mandible that does not bear teeth, and that's important. But so I'm going to define this a little bit better so it's easier to see. Comes down and oh, sorry about that. This portion of the mandible here, this notch, is called the sigmoid notch. Sigmoid notch. And it is helpful in that it defines, if you draw a line from the sigmoid notch or the trough of the sigmoid notch anteriorly, this is the coronoid process. The coronoid process is important for several reasons, but one thing is that the temporalis muscle inserts on the coronoid process to help close the mandible. Then posterior to the sigmoid notch are three components of the mandible. One is that portion which articulates with the glenoid fossa, the temporal bone, and is contained within the TMJ, and also has the insertion of the lateral pterygoid muscle, and that portion is the condyle. Condyle. Below the condyle, but above the sigmoid notch, is the subcondylar portion of the mandible. And then this portion, which is below the sigmoid notch, but above the angle of the mandible, is the ramus. A couple of other things that are important. The outside portion of the mandible is the buccal portion of the mandible, and the inside portion is the lingual portion. Also, this portion of the mandible in which the teeth insert is the alveolar ridge. Alveolar ridge. And then finally, this portion of the mandible at the base of the mandible, as you can see here, thickened. Its naming has eluded me for years, but I think the best way to describe this is that this is the basal portion. Some people have described it as body, but unfortunately that overlaps with the more commonly word body, so the basal portion of the mandible. So I think this is generally a good description of mandibular anatomy with some details that help us be more specific. Symphyseal and parasymphyseal region delineated by the canine, the body, and ramus delineated by the angle, which is created by not only the third molar but the pterygomasseteric sling, the ramus below the sigmoid notch, the coronoid process, subcondylar and condylar portions, along with the buccal and lingual sides, alveolar ridge, and basal portion. So hopefully all that's helpful. Thanks, guys. Hopefully this is helpful. I'm going to drink some water.